You're listening to a DM podcast.
Hello and welcome to Sportish, where we look at life through the lens of sport. My name's Georgie Trickett.
And I am Libby Trickett.
And Lib, today we're doing something a little bit different.
So exciting.
We have been having lots of different sports conversations about the role of disability sport and the opportunity for disability sport, and the responses have been huge. We have loved chatting with athletes like Paralympian Brendan Hall and Jeremy Peacock.
Yeah, and bringing in all-around legend and Australia's most decorated female Paralympian, Ellie Cole, to guest host. She didn't replace me, thank goodness. I still have my job. We've also spoken to community advocates like Nick Marshall, who set up the inclusive albatross nippers down on the Gold Coast. Mia Walsh, who was part of a kids' deaf AFL football program at the Yeronga Devils Community Club, as well as community-level athletes, Lorelei and Olivia Page, who are involved with adaptive netball.
And if we're honest, it made us realise that there were just so many more conversations that we should be having in this space, and a real need to help community connect to disability sports.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is so often we hear from parents who are struggling to connect their kids into the right sport. And we know this is a particular challenge for our disability and neurodiverse community.
So for the next few weeks, we want you to listen in. We want you to hear some incredible stories from athletes you might never have heard of before, but by the end of this episode, you'll be wanting to tell your friends about it over coffee.
Our first episode today is very exciting, is para-triathlete and recent blind cricket convert, Katie Kelly. Katie has represented Australia at 2 Paralympic Games, winning a gold medal in Rio 2016. She has 2 World Championships and has been admitted to the Oz Triathlon Sporting Hall of Fame. She's a diversity and inclusion advocate and works for a range of organisations as well. I mean, I don't know how she does this on top of everything else, but as well as the founder of the Sports Access Foundation, set up to specifically help fund access to sport to kids with a disability. She holds multiple university degrees,
Unbelievable.
has been to Everest Base Camp, which is like a dream of mine, and has finished more marathons than we can possibly list here. If sport and an ability to get things done isn't in this woman's DNA, then I don't know what is. Welcome, Katie.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think to start off today, I'd love to understand the place that you grew up and the setting for sport for you as a kid.
Yeah, I do love talking about my country upbringing, casino on the North Coast, and it's actually well known for Beef Week, and they actually have Beef Week Queen. I was never Beef Week Queen.
Tragic.
Devastated.
I mean, it's the one thing you didn't get.
I didn't get crowned
We
with a
could
steak.
have put that on our list.
I know. I want to get crowned with a steak, right?
Wow.
When I was in the UK, I did tell them that where I grew up, the Beef Week Queen got crowned with a steak, and I'm sure they looked
didn't
at me
know
and
what
thought,
to
"Are you
think."
serious?"
They would have
I'm like,
believed you.
"No, I'm just joking. So the great thing about country upbringing, as you would know and heard, like it's just that access to sport, and sport was everything. So, you know, it was swimming, netball, basketball and whatever. And, you know, I tell the story of swimming and at the casino swimming amateur club, and communities like that was all run by volunteers and just beautiful people. And, you know, Friday night swims was just everything to get your name mentioned in the local paper. And Mum and her friends would be up in the stands drinking sneaky rum and cokes and that sort of thing.
Great.
Brilliant.
You know, just really
Good times on a Friday
out
night.
for everybody. And if you got swim with the meat, you got the Chicken Express across the road.
Oh,
Free.
my goodness. Brilliant.
And the kids these days get McDonald's, but back then it was Chicken Express.
I used to get Brody's.
Oh, did
Oh,
you?
yes,
Yeah,
that
do you
was a
remember
chicken shop in
Brody's? Yeah.
Brisbane.
I bet you won that every week, Libby.
No, I never won it.
Really?
Devastating.
Not on your bio?
Heartbreaking. Yeah, I know it's not on my bio.
But the thing I remember too is, you know, I've got hearing loss, and later in life I found out I had vision loss. I always remember doing swimming club, and I could never hear the coach. And that's why it's so great where we progressed to. And the coach was a lovely lady, but she had no idea. And she'd be barking out orders to all these, you know, 30-year-old kids swimming, 30 kids swimming, and I had no idea what the set was. So I just follow all the other kids. But there was never those conversations of, look, Katie can't hear, and I'd just be going to my mate Joe, what are we doing? Just follow me, you'll be right, sort of thing. But the other thing was, I always remember a kid I was in school with, Michael, and he was in a wheelchair. He used a wheelchair, and the memory of Michael in year 5, and we were all playing in the yard, and he couldn't play. He would be sitting there in his chair. All us kids would be running around, and I guess for me, having hearing loss, wearing hearing aids, I was very aware of what it felt like to be left out or to be isolated or to not feel connected, not to be able to hear well and so on. And in many ways that kind of memory stayed with me, and it would stay with anyone. And I always wonder, what happened to Michael and what that did to his self of sense and belonging and connection. And it would have had a huge impact. So as we know, like the power of sport for all of us, for how we feel about ourselves, to play with our mates, is so important for young kids. So it's really great to be on here today and starting those sort of conversations.
I think for, you started to allude to it, that connection that sport can bring and build, and that was obviously something that drew you in to sport.
Yeah.
But what drew you to triathlon? Like, what was it? And eventually cricket, because I don't understand that at all. But, but like, what about triathlon is it that kind of really got you excited?
Yeah, I guess so. When I was 21, 22, to give you some context, I was working at the National Rugby League. I did sports management at school, at uni, and that was my passion. And I was told at 22, Katie, you have this condition called Usher syndrome, which explains why I was that person that would be out with my mates at night time. And I was always bumping into things, and people would think I'd had one too many beers, but, there was another reason for it. And he said, you have Usher syndrome. And it made me think about when I was an usher at the Queensland Performing Arts Complex. And I used to have to escort people to their seats. And I was terrible at it. And when I heard the Usher syndrome, I thought, no wonder I was a terrible usher. It all started to make sense. But so in terms of getting into triathlon, and I guess losing my vision, more tunnel vision, team sport less became an option. And it was just that acceptance. I remember I had my last game of squash with my sister over uni holidays, and we loved playing squash, and I just couldn't see the ball. And she's like, sweet, we call it a day. And I'm like, yep. But now there's modified versions that someone with low vision can play racquetball or whatever. But I decided, one-dimensional things, and triathletes can be quite one-dimensional. So you're running, you're swimming, you're biking in one direction.
Line,
yeah. So I started doing triathlon, and I got into Ironman and so on in Newcastle, and then that just brought up a whole new world to me, and on I went with that. Yeah,
It's actually incredible that at a point where your life could have got smaller because of what was going on with your vision, the choice of sport actually made it so much bigger than it was, and created a whole new world for you. What were the unexpected benefits of being a triathlete?
Well, it then evolved to obviously going to represent Australia at the highest level. But I guess I just want to make the point, when I found out I had Usher syndrome, in my mind there was nothing about this condition that was going to change the way I live and the way that people would perceive me. I'm still Katie. I'm still that person that has ambitions for a career, for travel, etc. So, and I had the thought as a 23-year-old, remember when you were 23, that life's on your doorstep and possibilities, that nothing changes for me, but I was interested in, would the world accommodate for someone like me who's losing their eyesight and hearing? What does that look like for me in a career perspective, in a sport perspective? And from a career perspective, I remember meeting a guy, Bernie Cohen, who had hearing aids. He worked for Channel 7, and thinking, wow, people with hearing aids do make it. Oh. So when I talk about visibility and role modelling, that's what it is, because for me, working at the NRL, I thought, if he can make it, I can make it in a commercial world. Yeah. So in terms of triathlon, which is what I love about the movement of Paralympics, I always hid my disability, and there was a certain shame to it, because that's how I grew up. No one talked about disability. The person who had intellectual impairment in my country town, it was like this shame. I'll never forget meeting people like Danny DeToro for the first time, and being part of the Paralympic team, and meeting people like Ellie Cole. Suddenly disability doesn't matter. we're all literally taking the piss out of each other, deadpan, sarcastic kind of humour. But it's also, there's a sense of realness about it. And then there's this sense of, and they talked about it in Paris, wonderful athletes like Jared Clifford, the need to, you know, the privilege you have as being part of that team and taking that back home to improve lives for others. And so with the Paralympics and triathlon, I felt empowered more to talk about my disability. I'm in a workplace job where we talk about inclusion all the time. And likewise in the sporting context of how we can all be better to bring everybody along.
Can I ask, with your Usher syndrome, so that's something that's developed over time?
Yes.
You had hearing loss and required hearing aids from a young age.
Yeah.
But what has it been like to kind of progressively lose your vision and kind of come to an acquired disability?
Oh, it's people always say good question, but I really appreciate you asking it, because often when you think about disability, you know, it's so diverse.
Yeah.
And even Ellie sort of said, I don't know. So she was using a word around ambulant or amputee, and the reference wasn't the most contemporary word.
Oh, yes. And she learnt it was limb difference.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was using a word the other day and I had to correct myself. So disability is diverse, as is the human race. But in terms of Usher syndrome, it's interesting because it is a degenerative condition. And I guess when I found out I had it and this deaf-blind condition, Usher syndrome, like, what is that? And I think about my parents were devastated, and for any parent that thinking, oh, this is what's happening to Katie. I think there was a sense of grief and like shock. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I've come to know we call each other Ushies. And it was so wonderful in the blind cricket team. I met Sam and Nicole, and they're like you, mums with kids, annoying husbands, you know, trying to get sleep.
All of the things.
And I say this just to normalise it, like it was just everyday lay people. And they're talking about going to work, and the kids have got this 18th party and whatever. And we talk about how it is for us in our everyday. And like this morning, I knocked my head against the fridge, because you've got to be really disciplined with how you operate. And so losing my eyesight is a challenge, and it's mental fatigue.
Yeah.
And like you've seen, I've got my guide dog Guthrie here today, and I've only had him for 3 years. But I like to focus on it's evolving rather than losing. And it's teaching me so much about myself and other people and how other people engage with you.
Yep.
And so it's so interesting, people's perception of you as a person with a guide dog. And I had someone say, you don't look like a person with a guide dog. And I'm like, well, what does a person with a guide dog look like?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. What are you meant to look like?
So I guess with having Usher syndrome, like the thing is with disability is that you're not going to lose anything. You only gain. And people have this sense of, oh, your life's going to be really hard. It's like, that's not my attitude, that's yours.
Yeah.
So I certainly have this sense of like it teaches me a lot and about a lot of people, but also the education of the unconscious bias and disableist attitude and so on.
It's fascinating, and I hope you don't mind me asking that
Not at
question,
all.
because I think it's interesting, but also something that able-bodied people might feel uncomfortable in asking to
and
like
even other
understand more
people-
about you.
Yeah, and you know, I've met some, as you do in the sports game, and you meet high-profile media personalities, and I can tell they're just not sure because they see me and they go, so what can you see? And like people see me with a guide dog, don't see me with a guide dog. And so that's why I'm so happy to talk about it, because it is not common. And but it's also the challenge of it is some person might use a wheelchair and it's a static condition. It might not change. But there's a lot of people with disability where it changes constantly, and that's how it is
From
for
day
me.
to day even.
Yeah, because I used to have a license. I drove around a combi van in Europe with my 5 girlfriends, but then I moved to using a tandem bike. I now use a white cane and all of those things. But I like to always empower myself with options, and there's always options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie, on that, did your classification change between one Paralympics to the next as your disability changes and evolves?
Yeah, well, it did when I recently represented Australia at blind cricket, which is just amazing. As a 50-year-old, I mean, who does that?
Congratulations.
So cool.
I love that was your debut.
All my family friends are like, what are you doing now?
It's brilliant.
I love
Just
it.
playing
You
cricket.
were never too old
You're
to play
like
cricket.
seriously inspiration to me. Like, what can I do?
So in the low vision blind community, they have B1, B2, B3. So B1's no sight, B2 some, and B3 better. So I was a B3 for Rio and Tokyo. I was verging on a B2, and you get classified through doing the test with the ophthalmologist, and then they assess it that way. So you know what? When I competed at Rio, I actually felt a bit conflicted because I was quite a visual B3. But by the time I did Tokyo, I was more of a B2, but still a B3. But I guess in triathlon terms, the B1 has a 3-minute, 30-second start on the B2 and B3. What was really interesting in Rio, I was first and the second and third were B3 and fourth was B3. And then by the time Tokyo came around, Susanna Rodriguez, who's amazing, she was on the cover of Time magazine. She's a doctor, no sight, B1.
Wow.
She won in Tokyo. She's won the last, unstoppable. So it flipped around.
Yeah.
So the B1s came first, second and third in Tokyo. I guess, yes, there's different classifications and it can change for an athlete. And that's why when they had those conversations and documentary recently on ABC about athletes and all of that, I think they just need to be really sensitive. You don't know the circumstances. And if someone wants to take a pathway of not disclosing a certain truth, just be careful how you report that because there's a lot more to it than you may not be aware and other complexities or whatever that they might have. But then going to the blind cricket, so this is 3 years after I've retired and I had the test done again and I'm now a B2. So that just means, like wheelchair rugby, they have so many classes on the field at any one time. And likewise in blind cricket, you'll have 5 B1s, 4 B2s, 3 B3s, etc.
And you have to have a certain mix on the field at any one
Yeah,
stage?
you do. And the great thing about blind cricket is you've got to have 5. Obviously in cricket there's 11. But I love the fact that the majority of the players are B1s with no sight.
Wow.
Because if you have no sight, your options for sport...
Oh, so limited.
Yes. And I'll quickly tell you about Nikki from Bunbury, and she was my roomie. She has no sight. Nikki's about 50, and she's a real country girl. She loves John Williamson, right? So you're getting a sense of Nikki.
I love that that's the benchmark for country.
Well, and then
So
and
Proper country.
And Nikki, all due respect if you're listening, hun, but she's like she loves she reminds me of a Sharon off Kath and Kim.
Brilliant.
She talks about booning.
We
and
love you, Nikki.
growing up watching cricket and and I think about Nikki as an 18, 19-year-old and she describes her darkest days when, if 14, 15, a country town, there was no option for her then. And she's represented Australia for the first time over April when we played Pakistan. And so what we did was we had we were roomies. I said, Nikki, should we put John Williamson's Baggy Green song on? Because she loves it.
Stop it.
And I'm not a John Williamson
Did you
fan.
know
I'm
there
like,
was a Baggy
I
Green
had
song?
no idea.
Neither did I. And so we're there clapping away to John Williamson, Baggy Green. But just in terms of classifications and the different challenges people have with disability, this is what I love about, everybody has a right to a high performance pathway.
Yeah.
In any context. Now we need to move that conversation to people with more complex needs and how we can step up and be better in that regard.
Could you have ever imagined that you'd be not only representing Australia at the highest level, whether it's blind cricket or at the Paralympics, but then being as successful as you were?
I mean, I don't see myself as successful. I see myself as just doing what I love doing. Yeah. And I guess I just love sport. And that was it. And I love pushing myself and pushing my body and new challenges. No, I never saw myself representing Australia because I wasn't like a Libby Lenton,
You remember my maiden name.
I mean,
I love you.
Katie is of a similar age group.
Yes, you are.
Absolute fangirl. So, I mean, I remember swimming Petria Thomas.
Oh, my gosh.
yes.
I mean...
And I was in Ballina and we were doing a butterfly race And Casino was the poor cousin town, and she's from Ballina where they had the swim squad.
Yeah.
And I would have come 8th in that race, and she's just smashing it out first. So, but that didn't worry me. I just loved being a part of it. So I couldn't believe I had this opportunity when I rang Triathlon Australia 2015 and said, look, I've been told I'm legally blind. Is there any way I could do the Ironman triathlon? That's what I want to do. And they said, Katie, we're looking for vision impaired athletes to compete in Rio in 18 months' time. It started with one phone call in a taxi after being told I was legally blind. And I just went, yeah, sure. And I remember getting my first tracksuit. I was with the ACT, Academy of Sport. Yeah. And I rang my sister and I'm like, I finally got the tracksuit. Because I never represent anything more than
It's
a
all
casino
about the
swim club.
tracksuit.
It's all about the
bag
tracksuit.
of green, but tracksuits.
So, no, I'd never had imagined that. And so that's where this privilege of representing Australia, and I remember getting the gold medal at Cocobana Beach, Jesus the Redeemer in the background, my mum and dad and my friends and family.
That must have been surreal.
Oh, it was. But I was so in the moment, but I think what it came back to, and I think a lot of us, like what you guys do, because you've had these opportunities in sport, is about the giving back. And I remember Marisol Casado was the president, I love that name, of Triathlon World, and now she's on the International Triathlon. And she put her medal around my neck, and I remember saying, thank you so much for all you've done to make para-triathlon. Because for me, on that start line with 9 other vision impaired athletes, some are blind, it's like that was the best place I could ever be. There was, so a real sense of gratitude and so grateful then I could take that platform to do other things. Yeah.
It's just amazing. I'm also really interested to understand and talk more about this, and Libby, I know you are too, about this whole thing where you went to Everest Base Camp. And you've not just done that, you've run marathons, you've hiked really interesting trails around the world. So what is it that compels you to not only be in like an elite sporting environment like triathlon or like blind cricket, but then to move to these very, I guess, unregulated environments and terrains and put yourself out there in that sort of space?
Yeah. Well, I think I heard you've done the Kokoda trek.
I have, yes.
And I would never do that. Like,
I think based on your bio, I think you could do it.
That's full on, like mud, mosquitoes, rain.
Not for me.
Dark.
Yeah, Katie, I think you'd be fine.
But I think, like you and Libby, it's that sense of, we always want to evolve and grow, and you do that through putting yourself into discomfort and
Isn't it the best place to be?
Afterwards.
Until
once it's done.
True.
There's this track I used to train to on triathlon on my bike, and it was called I thought it was a good idea at the time. And I often think that you start a marathon and 5K and you're like,
Why?
yeah. So something like Everest, for me, I'm just so aware of my privilege, and I just feel like I get too comfortable and I need to go into another environment. Like I did the Camino pilgrimage across Spain. But it's for a person losing sight, it's also, I don't want to get too comfortable and know, and I'm sort of learning that sense of coping without sight.
Yeah.
Retraining my brain.
Yeah.
So everyone's talking about the new lingo word of neurodiversity, neuro pathways and all of that. And
You're doing that on a daily basis.
Yeah. And so I think, there's a lot to be gained from that. And I found myself in Everest, it was almost like I was walking beyond what my sight was capable of giving me, because I'm just learning sensory different ways. But what I would say about Everest Base Camp, it's an amazing walk to do, and the beautiful Nepalese people. On the way down, that was harder for me, and we stopped to get a drink, and there was this young girl there that looked 12, 13, carrying a huge pack with an older man, and my first instinct was like, is she safe? And my beautiful guide, Anil, who was only just recently married, poor bloke, had to spend 2 weeks with me, who's 23, and he said, no, she's safe, that's her dad. She's working. And then she turned around and I noticed she was a child of Down syndrome. And my heart just sort of went to my throat because, we talk about people who could be more vulnerable and poor and in really tough circumstances. But the thing was, she was working.
Yeah.
She was part of the productivity of that everyday life, and she was safe. And it was just, that was the moment for me to see a young girl with disability that was living her best life in those circumstances. And I just walked away crying. It's definitely about, more growth and opportunities. I would never have met her otherwise. You know, that's what you're always seeking.
Yes.
Yeah.
New experiences.
Oh, incredible. Katie, if there are people in the community who are listening to this chat, want to access blind sports or deaf sports that are in Australia, where's the best place for them to start?
Yeah, and it's not always easy depending on where you live and what's around. But I think for parents it is a challenge because they start one phone call with the local swim club and, they might just get a new starter who has no idea about, and they say, oh, my son's neurodiverse and so he'll need a bit one-on-one, and the person's like, well, we don't really do that. I've had a call like that, and you think, so, and they can spend a lot of time ringing around, but I think if you start with a national organisation, and there tend to be more resources, and a recently formed alliance is the Australian Sporting Alliance People with Disability, which you guys are doing some conversations on, and they have 55,000 members across 5, 6, 7, 8 different disability sport organisations, so Transplant Australia, Deaf Sports Australia, Blind Sports Australia, Riding for the Disabled, Special Olympics, Bok Cheer Australia, Disability Sports Australia. And I think what they're really trying to achieve with that is more efficiency in how the disability organisations work to share resources so that then we can utilise funds and knowledge and insight better. But if you have a child who's low hearing, who low vision, neurodiverse, etc., I think organisations like that are a really great starting point. And then you kind of, as you know, branch out from there in terms of if you're living more in New South Wales or Gladstone in Queensland, and finding that inclusive club. And we know clubs are getting so much better and having inclusive champions, more education. And I think it comes down to clubs really understanding what the parent is after, being curious and being just willing to make even just small modifications. It might not be much. Because I found with the blind cricket, I just wanted to play cricket, and I ran the local cricket club. And my girlfriend said, yeah, you should play cricket. It's really fun. We play in Melbourne. Then we have a few wines afterwards. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good.
It's my kind of sport.
But then I kind of made some calls, and I really can't play over ball. And, and so someone suggested blind cricket, and Queensland has an association. But the thing with that, I need to travel 150K up the road. How do I get there? It's a $160 Uber. So when we talk about barriers, they're the barriers.
Yeah.
But if my local cricket club said, look, we do have a women's comp, let's have a conversation of how we can modify that when you play. But it's also important not to make it about me. It's about the club being inclusive.
Yes.
You never say, oh, we're going to play to these rules because young Johnny's here and he's got no side. It's about, we're going to play modified rules. It's good for all of us to learn.
Yeah.
We're going to use a white ball and bowl underarm today. Yeah. And maybe later you figure out it's Johnny here's got low vision. So that's where, it can be a challenge to find a club that's accessible and it can be modified to whatever your needs might be. But certainly there are these specialised disability groups, sporting groups that are a good starting point. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point because we know that there are these amazing pockets out there where there's great modified, great sort of environments for kids to be playing sport, but you almost have to know someone to find them, and it can be a really challenging experience for parents who are already dealing with, health systems and school systems.
Learning all new things.
And learning lots of different things to then navigate a sports system as well. So to have these peak bodies like
the deaf sports and blind sports.
To be able to go to them and use them is so important and absolutely worth picking up the phone and having a chat to them.
Yeah, and there's power in inclusion and integration, and we need to do that. Australia is so geographically spread, not a big population, so we need that because it's not always possible. But there's also the power in being able to, for me to join my Aussie blind cricket team and have the conversation to do all the Paralympics, because we all you just need time out from your disability and with people who understand what that's like.
Yes.
So I think we just get that model right on both levels. But certainly, it's hard for parents. And the classification doesn't need to apply at grassroots level. It's just about all abilities and modification.
Yeah.
I think about my mum who's had a stroke and uses a frame and still wants to play or she wouldn't do basketball or anything like that now. But it's the inclusion piece and, as you know, modified sports benefits everyone at different life stages.
Yes.
And it helps with that participation piece from, grassroots starting out all the way through to someone like your mum.
Yeah. But like if you think about if you want to play racquetball, it's very inclusive and modified, and I'm sure you could smash out a really good game of tennis. But, you're a bit tired from 5 children and so on. Maybe a modified game where it's not so
That would be
intense
lovely.
Where do we sign up to this?
I'm in.
So it's like all of us can do with modified games.
Absolutely.
And sports are doing that, though. It's good to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Katie, you're the founder and director of the Sports Access Fund, and it's a charity that you established in 2017 to provide sports grants for young Australians with disability.
Yeah.
What kind of drove you to create this organisation, and who has actually benefited from the grants that you've provided?
Yeah, thank you. It was the telling point, like I talked about Michael, I think about kids like that, if he wanted to do wheelchair basketball and he had that old classic chair. So it's about that equipment, those sorts of barriers. But when I went to Rio and Tokyo, I had to fundraise for my 2 tandem bikes, $25,000 each.
Wow.
I got some sponsorship, and so even at that high performance level, there's still a lot of extra costs, and I had won a gold medal at Rio, but I still needed to fundraise for Tokyo. And there's more equipment fund available, the recent federal government grant. Like, that's the difference it's going to make. But after Rio, my brother said, hey, there's this young girl that's been following you. I'm like, oh, I've got a fan. She was only 8 or 9.
Wow.
Cute.
And I went to see her in a city, and she'd had leukemia and nearly lost her life, and she survived. But with that, she lost her sight. And so I went in, and she's so frail and had lost her hair and was growing back. And she had this beautiful smile, and she said, Katie, what was McKeely like as a guide? McKeely Jones was my guide in Rio.
Wow.
She even said her name. I said to McKeely, she said your name right.
It's amazing.
Because everyone called her Mikel or Michelle. And then she said, what sort of tether did you use?
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And where did you get your tandem bike from? And so
She knew all of this.
She knew all of this, yeah. And you talk about visibility role modelling, I think why people with disability, it's good to disclose in a workplace. We all need that person to know that we can make it, and in this sometimes ableist sort of world. And I had the thought of Sport Access Foundation, and that certainly propelled it. So I established it Australia Day that few months after that. But one of the great stories I like to share is our first recipient was Cole Pierce.
Oh, stop it.
So he was
amazing.
like 14 at the time, and he wrote, and we keep it very simple. Like, parents want to apply, we don't worry about paperwork. It's just you have enough of that. And he kind of clearly said, I want to go to the Paralympics. And he was 14, and he said, from a dairy farm.
Yeah.
My parents, we're doing it tough, and I've got to travel to Melbourne for swimming. So he got awarded our first grant of $2,000. But I never forget when I rang his mum, Teresa Pierce. She's an absolute classic. She's like, hang on, dolls. She said, I'm in the shed with the cows. I said, no worries. I could hear the cows in the background.
Oh, my goodness.
And she stepped out, and I said, oh, Mrs. Pierce, I'm letting you know that Cole's just been awarded $2,000. And she just started crying.
Oh.
And so, I just think people, it's such a competitive world about having huge impact, and, I can't speak volumes of thousands of dollars raised, but we do enough to have an impact, and knowing that a child who's 11, 12, 13 know that they matter,
Yeah.
and that we understand there's extra costs.
Yeah.
And so that's what we kind of pitch ourselves to, and 6 of our recipients, including Kira Stevens, Jameson Leeson, Grace Brimlow, Jack Howe, Dana Crees, all recipients, all went to Paris Paralympics. And it's not just about the Paralympics, of course.
Yeah.
So we've got this beautiful honour roll on our website, and it's just lovely, all these kids that went at 12, 13, 14 and they're now going on to university and other things. So it's lovely.
It's such an incredible foundation, and there's something you'd like to announce to the listeners today.
I do, exclusive to you too, which is so special.
We appreciate it.
We feel it.
Feeling the love. So we're so excited to open up our 25 grants. So this is our 9th year running, and we're all volunteers. And a lot of our donations come from other kids that are fundraising at their school and that sort of thing, which is great. So we've got our 4 types of grants on offer again, which is Kickstart, No Barriers, one for clubs, and Pathway to Paralympics. It's really easy to apply, so just jump onto sportaccessfoundation.org. I have to say our social media is not the greatest because it's me that's doing it.
Hey, we feel you so deeply.
But if there's any volunteers out there that love social media and want to get on board, reach out. So, they're open. They'll be open for about 6 weeks, and certainly any donors and people that want to get on board, because unfortunately we can't meet all the applicants every year, but we'd love to get to that point. So thank you. It's good to share that exclusive on Sportish today.
We feel very special.
Yeah, that's incredible, Katie. It's just been so lovely to chat to you and learn more about your story and understand more about disability and your experiences, and obviously your experience in Paralympics and blind cricket. It's been such a privilege, and to learn more about the Sport Access Foundation. It's just wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you to all our listeners for listening to this week's episode of Sportish. We will be back in your ears next week. We will put all the details from today's episode into our show notes. Please go and check out the Sports Access Foundation. Like Katie said, their latest grants program is now open. If you know someone in your community,
send it to them.
Let them know. Let your club know. Speak to your community about this program.
Check out the social media that Katie does.
I love to do.
Check out Katie's social media.
Give us some advice on where to go with it.
We will also be putting it up on our socials as well. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
We would like to acknowledge and give thanks to the traditional owners of the land we record this podcast on, the Yagara and Turrbal people,
and their continued connection to the land and waterways on which we meet.
This episode of Sportish is proudly brought to you by Australia's peak disability sports organisation, the Australian Sporting Alliance for People with Disability, and Blind Sport Australia, the national sporting organisation for blind and vision impaired sport.